On the day I was supposed to feel most loved, most beautiful, and most chosen, I was handed a baby bottle, wrapped in delicate white tissue paper, tied with a pink ribbon, and placed gently into my hands by the one woman who had always made me feel like I didn't belong, Judith Sterling, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. We were standing behind the chapel, minutes before the ceremony. My dress hugged every curve just right, my hair pinned perfectly, and my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my ears. "Open it," she said, smiling sweetly. Too sweetly. I should have known better. I peeled the tissue back, expecting maybe a handkerchief, a piece of jewelry, or something symbolic, something that acknowledged this moment, this milestone. But instead, a baby bottle. A baby bottle. With a note tucked inside. I glanced up at her, confused. My fingers pulled the paper out, unfolding it slowly. Just a few words in dainty cursive. "For when he finds a real wife." And then she laughed. Not a chuckle, not a snort, but a soft, satisfied, condescending laugh, like she'd been waiting all year for this one punchline. I froze. My throat tightened. My eyes stung. I looked at Ethan, my fiancé, my partner of 3 years, who stood right beside her. He said nothing, no reaction, no protest. "No, Mom, that's not okay." Just a nervous smile and eyes that darted away. He did nothing. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Not because of the bottle or the note or even Judith's cruelty, I'd seen that coming, but because of Ethan's silence, because he let her humiliate me on my wedding day. I felt like the room around me collapsed. All the white flowers, the soft violin music drifting in from the chapel, the laughter of guests settling into pews. It all went silent in my ears. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw the bottle back in her face. But I didn't, because I remembered what my mother always told me. Dignity doesn't yell. It walks tall and leaves. So instead, I tucked the bottle back in the tissue paper, placed it carefully back in the gift bag, and looked Judith right in the eye. "Thank you," I said. What a thoughtful gesture. She tilted her head, confused maybe, amused. She didn't realize I was already detaching. That's the funny thing about betrayal. It doesn't always make you explode. Sometimes it makes you see everything clearer. I walked into the chapel on shaky legs, holding my bouquet like a shield. My sister Sierra looked at me and immediately knew something was wrong. She reached for my hand, squeezed it hard, but didn't ask. The music played, the crowd stood, and I took my first steps down the aisle toward the man I was supposed to spend forever with. Ethan waited at the altar, still looking like the boy I fell in love with 3 years ago. But now, something was different. Something I couldn't unsee. Behind him, Judith sat in the front row, already smug, already victorious. And me? I was walking toward a choice, a moment I couldn't take back. The priest welcomed everyone, smiled kindly, and began the ceremony. The words blurred together: love, honor, commitment, forever. Then he looked at me. "Aveline Carter, do you take this man, Ethan Sterling, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The church went silent. Every eye turned toward me. I looked at Ethan. I looked at Judith. And then I smiled. Not the kind of smile that says, "I do." The kind of smile that says you have no idea what's coming next, because I was about to say something that would make the entire church gasp. They say you'll always remember your wedding day. The dress, the flowers, the music, the nervous smiles, the way your heart pounds when you realize this is it. Your forever is waiting at the end of that aisle. I remember mine, too. But not for any of those reasons. I remember it because I realized, in front of hundreds of people, that the man I loved would never protect me. But let me start before the aisle, before the baby bottle, before the priest asked the question that cracked everything open. My name is Aveline Carter. I was 28 when I thought I was walking into my future, a future I'd built in my head for years. White picket fences, cozy holidays, growing old with someone who made me feel seen. I'm the oldest of 2 girls. My younger sister, Sierra, is my firecracker. Blunt, protective, the kind of person who never lets anyone mess with people she loves. Growing up, it was just the 2 of us and our mom, Lena. No dad. He left when I was 6. One day he was there, the next he was gone. We never really talked about it. We just learned how to build strong walls and stand on our own. Lena worked 2 jobs, always smiled even when she was tired. She taught us how to be kind but never weak, how to give people grace but never give them our peace. Her favorite saying was, "You can bend without breaking, but don't forget when it's time to stand straight again." I carried that in my bones. And then came Ethan Sterling. I met him at a nonprofit gala. He volunteered there, helping with logistics and planning. He was soft-spoken, kind, a little awkward, but funny in the kind of way that feels safe. He listened when I spoke, made me laugh when I needed it, and seemed to understand that I didn't need saving. I just needed someone to walk beside me. We fell in love slowly, the kind of love that feels comfortable, like a warm sweater. I introduced him to my mom and Sierra. Mom liked him. She saw the good in people. Sierra was cautious. She never said anything cruel, but she watched him closely, like she was waiting for something she couldn't name. I met his family a few months in. That's when I first felt it, the weight. Judith Sterling, his mother, was everything I wasn't. Elegant in a stiff kind of way, expensive perfume, flawless pearls, the kind of woman who made her judgments sound like compliments. She looked at me the way someone might look at a wrinkle in a silk dress. The first thing she ever said to me wasn't hello or nice to meet you. It was, "So what does your father do?" I told her he wasn't in the picture. She smiled. "Ah, I see." That was her thing. Always seeing things without saying them out loud. Little comments, passive digs, insisting on helping with our wedding planning, and then rewriting every detail behind my back, making sure Ethan knew what her vision was, talking to me like I was a placeholder. Ethan would brush it off. "She doesn't mean anything by it," he'd say. "She's just trying to help." But that's the thing. Judith didn't need to yell. Her words cut like paper. Thin, precise, easy to miss unless you were the one bleeding. Still, I tried. I smiled. I compromised. I thought, once we're married, she'll back off. The morning of the wedding, the sky was clear. The chapel smelled like lilies and eucalyptus. Everything looked like a fairy tale, and I kept telling myself, this is it. Push through. This is your day, too. Sierra was buzzing with energy, fixing my train, keeping the photographers at bay. Mom stood quietly in the corner of the bridal suite, watching me with those calm eyes that always knew more than she said. She walked over, brushed my hair back, and whispered, "You don't have to do anything today that doesn't feel like love." I smiled, even though my stomach was in knots, because something already felt off. Judith had barely looked at me all morning. Ethan was distracted, and deep down, I think I knew. This wasn't my fairy tale. But I walked forward anyway, because I believed in commitment, because I believed in choosing love even when it was hard. I just didn't know yet that I was the only one doing the choosing. The chapel was full. Rows of friends and family, all dressed in soft pastels, turned their heads as the organ began to play. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful reflections across the pews. Everything looked perfect, but I couldn't feel any of it. My hands were cold. My heart thudded against my ribcage. I was trying to breathe like normal, smile like normal, but nothing was normal anymore. Not after what just happened behind the chapel doors. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my mind. The baby bottle. Judith's smug little smirk, her words echoing in my ears. For when he finds a real wife. And Ethan, my fiancé, standing right there saying nothing. Not one word, not even a glance of concern, just an awkward shuffle of his feet and a tight-lipped smile like he didn't want to cause a scene. I wanted to scream. I wanted him to defend me just once, but he never had, and now I was starting to wonder if he ever would. Sierra grabbed my hand as we waited for our cue. She looked up at me. "You good?" Her voice was soft but sharp, like she was trying to read between the lines of my silence. I nodded too quickly. She leaned in. If something's wrong, we can stop this." I shook my head, not because I was sure I wanted to go through with it, but because I didn't want to cry. Not here. Not yet. The doors opened, the music swelled, and I walked down the aisle like every woman who's ever told herself it'll be fine, even when everything inside her is screaming that it's not. Ethan stood at the altar in a crisp navy suit, hands folded in front of him. He looked handsome, familiar, but suddenly, I didn't recognize him. I searched his eyes for something. Regret, apology, affection, but they were blank, like he was already halfway checked out. Behind him, Judith sat in the front row in a dove gray suit and pearls, beaming like she'd just won something, like she was watching a performance she directed. As I walked past her, she tilted her head slightly and smiled, that same thin, superior smile I'd come to know too well. I turned my face forward. I was not going to cry. The ceremony began. The priest spoke about love, commitment, and growing together. His words blurred into each other. I heard the guests laugh softly when he made a light joke about married life. I smiled, but only with my mouth. Inside, I was spiraling. How did I get here? When did I start ignoring the signs? There were so many little moments over the last 3 years when Ethan would let Judith interrupt me, override me, even mock me in front of others. He'd always excuse her behavior. She's just being dramatic. You're reading too much into it. It's not worth a fight. But now I knew it wasn't about avoiding a fight. It was about avoiding choosing me. And here I was, minutes away from promising him forever. My chest tightened. I glanced at my mom, who was sitting on the edge of her seat, eyes locked on me. She looked calm, but I could tell she knew I was unraveling. She gave me the smallest nod, the kind of nod that says, "You know what's right. Do it." I felt Sierra behind me, her steady presence like a protective wall. The priest turned to Ethan, asked him the question, "Do you take Aveline Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Ethan smiled and said, "I do." Of course he did. Why wouldn't he? He wasn't the one who'd been insulted. He wasn't the one told she wasn't enough. He was still his mother's perfect boy. Then the priest turned to me. "Aveline Carter, do you take Ethan Sterling to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The room fell silent. Every heartbeat felt like an earthquake inside my chest. I looked at Ethan, waiting. I looked at Judith, still smiling. I looked at Sierra, fierce and ready. I looked at my mother, calm, strong, trusting me. And for the first time in a very long time, I looked at myself, and I knew. This moment wasn't just about Ethan. It was about whether I'd keep betraying myself to make other people comfortable. So I inhaled slowly, and I smiled. Not the smile of a bride in love, the smile of a woman about to burn down a lie, and finally tell the truth. "Aveline Carter, do you take Ethan Sterling to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Silence. That question, just 10 simple words, rang through the chapel like a bell. Every eye turned to me. The guests, the priest, Ethan. Even Judith leaned forward as if she were watching a slow-motion car crash she'd orchestrated herself. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, my fingers twitching around the bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. My heart thudded so loudly in my ears that it drowned out everything else. I stood there, in my satin gown, veil tucked back, surrounded by candlelight and perfection, and I was drowning. But here's the thing no one tells you about drowning. It's not always violent. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes you smile as it happens. I looked at Ethan, the man I had laughed with, dreamed with, kissed under Christmas lights, the man I once thought I'd grow old beside. He looked back at me with that same expectant expression he'd worn for years, software, blank, silent, the kind of face that asks nothing and promises nothing. He didn't even look nervous. He looked resigned, like he assumed I'd just go along with it, because I always had. And then slowly, something shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was grief. Grief for the girl I used to be, the girl who made excuses for people, who told herself love meant patience even when it meant pain, who shrank a little more every time she swallowed her truth to keep someone else comfortable. My grip loosened on the bouquet. I looked out at the guests, friends, co-workers, distant relatives, people I barely knew, people I loved, people who didn't know what I had just endured behind those chapel doors. And then my eyes found Mom. She was sitting tall. Her lips were pressed tight, but her eyes were soft, steady. They weren't pleading. They weren't scared. They were waiting. Not for me to say yes. Not for me to go through the motions, but for me to choose me. Next to her sat Sierra, with her jaw clenched and her hand gripping the edge of the pew, like she was ready to run up there and drag me out herself if I needed it. I felt them both holding space for me, giving me permission to walk away, even if it meant walking alone. That was when I remembered something Mom used to tell us growing up. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is stop explaining and just act. So I did. I let the silence linger 1 second longer, then I turned, slowly, to the priest. My voice came out calm, clear, stronger than I expected. No. The words sliced through the air like a blade. There was a gasp, not from one person but from the entire church. A ripple of stunned breaths and sharp whispers. I didn't flinch. I turned to Ethan. I don't take you, Ethan, because you haven't really been mine for a long time. You've always belonged to her. I nodded toward Judith. A few guests turned in their seats to look at her. Judith's face didn't move, but I could see the color drain from her cheeks. You stood there and watched your mother humiliate me. You said nothing. You let it happen. I stepped forward, holding out the small white gift bag I'd carried up the aisle with me, the same one she handed me minutes before the ceremony. This, I said, pulling the baby bottle out slowly, was your mother's wedding gift to me, along with a note that said, "For when he finds a real wife." Gasps again, murmurs. I held it up high so everyone could see. And he stood there, said nothing, just smiled. I walked to the front row and placed the bottle gently at Judith's feet. You can keep it. I don't need it. I turned back to Ethan. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I wanted a partner, not someone who watches me drown and calls it calm. Then I turned to the priest and said quietly, "I think this ceremony is over." I took a breath, turned away from the altar and walked down the aisle, alone. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor like a drumbeat. Click, click, freedom. And then as I reached the halfway point, I heard something behind me. Applause. It started small, just 1 or 2 people, but it grew. My mom was on her feet. So was Sierra. Then a few more guests. Then more. People were crying, nodding, smiling, some in shock, but none of it mattered, because I had just done the hardest thing I'd ever done. And for the first time in a long, long time. I felt light. My heels echoed through the chapel as I walked away from the altar, bouquet forgotten, veil trailing like a ghost behind me. I didn't look back, not at Ethan, not at Judith, not at the faces frozen in shock, but I heard them. Gasps, whispers, some laughter, nervous, uncertain, and then applause. It started with my sister. Sierra stood up so fast her chair screeched backward. She clapped, loud and proud, her face glowing like someone who'd been waiting years to see the truth land right where it belonged. My mom followed, elegant, strong, tears in her eyes but a smile blooming across her face like spring after a long winter. And then, one by one, others joined in. Not everyone, of course. Some sat stiff, horrified, scandalized, probably the same people who gossiped behind closed doors and told their daughters to be quiet to keep the peace. But enough people stood, enough clapped, enough believed what I had done wasn't madness. It was bravery. I didn't expect it, but the sound lifted me. It wrapped around me like a blanket. Not applause for a performance, but recognition. A silent agreement. We see you. We get it. But not everyone clapped. I passed Ethan's best man, his college roommate, Jared, who looked pale and uncertain. His girlfriend nudged him, whispering something I couldn't hear. I passed Ethan's aunt, who looked away like she was ashamed, not of me, but of what she now saw in her nephew. And I passed Judith, still sitting, still frozen. Her mouth slightly open, her fingers gripping her clutch so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The baby bottle sat at her feet like a grenade she hadn't expected to go off in public. She didn't clap. Of course she didn't. I paused for a moment beside her row, just enough for her to know I wasn't scared of her anymore. I looked her in the eye, and for once, she didn't look back with that smug superiority. There was no smirk, no clipped laugh. There was fear. Because for women like Judith, power isn't in love or joy or grace. It's in control. And I had just taken it away, in front of everyone. I didn't need to say anything. My silence was louder than anything I could have shouted. I kept walking. By the time I reached the chapel doors, Sierra had caught up to me. She grabbed my hand, breathless and teary-eyed. "That was the most badass thing I've ever seen," she said. I let out a shaky laugh. "I think I'm going to throw up," she grinned. "Totally fair. Want me to hold your hair back?" We both laughed, and then, like magic, the tension cracked off me like old armor. My shoulders dropped. My chest opened. I hadn't even realized how long I'd been holding myself tight, bracing for impact, for judgment, for the backlash. But now I'd faced it, and I was still standing. We stepped outside into the sun, and it felt like the world had changed. Behind us, the chapel doors remained open, voices still echoing from inside. People murmured, argued, processed, but none of it touched me anymore. Ethan never followed me out. Not that day, not the next, not ever. No texts, no calls, not even a message through a mutual friend. I heard through someone later that he left the reception early with his mother and didn't say much on the way out. Apparently, Judith was deeply embarrassed. I'm sure she was. For herself? Probably not. For losing control? Absolutely. And Ethan? I realized he hadn't just failed me once. He'd been failing me in quiet, consistent ways for years, and I had mistaken that silence for kindness, for gentleness. But really it was just passivity dressed up as peace, and peace that requires you to stay small? That's not peace. That's a cage. In the weeks that followed, I received messages from guests, some apologizing, some thanking me, a few women telling me they wished they'd had the courage to do what I did years ago. One woman even wrote, "You reminded me I still have a voice. I forgot. Thank you for waking it up." I read that message and cried, not out of sadness, but release. Because that's when I knew. This story wasn't just about Ethan or Judith or that baby bottle. It was about me, choosing truth over image, power over silence, and freedom over fear. That day, I didn't just walk out of a wedding. I walked back to myself. 3 days after I walked out of my own wedding, I woke up in my childhood bedroom. Same creaky floorboards, same ceiling fan that hummed too loudly, same scent of lavender and old books from the shelf Mom never let anyone dust because, as she says, memories live in settled places. I laid there for a long time that morning, not moving, not thinking, just breathing. For the first time in weeks, my body didn't feel like it was on high alert. My jaw wasn't clenched. My stomach didn't twist. The pressure in my chest, gone. I didn't regret leaving, not even for a second. What I did feel was grief. Not because I missed Ethan. I didn't. I missed the version of him I made up. The man I believed he could be. The version of us I'd built in my head for years, clinging to hope like a lifeline. I had invested so much in that future, I forgot to ask if it was even mine to begin with. And I was angry with myself for ignoring the signs, for accepting his silence, for laughing off Judith's cruelty to keep the peace. But most of all, I felt free. Later that afternoon, I sat on the back porch with my mom, sipping coffee from the mug I'd used since college, chipped on the rim but still standing. She didn't say anything for a while. She just sat with me, the way only mothers can. Her presence was steady, grounding. Then she said, "You could have gone through with it, you know. No one would have blamed you." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, but I would have blamed me." She smiled, proud. "Good. That means you've grown." I looked at her, tears welling in my eyes. "I feel like I let people down." "You didn't let anyone down, Aveline. You told the truth, and you did it with grace. There's not a woman alive who doesn't wish she'd done that at least once in her life." Those words stayed with me. A few days later, I finally opened my phone. Dozens of texts, some kind, some confused, some just nosy. I ignored most of them. But there was one message that stopped me cold. It was from Ethan's cousin, a quiet girl named Lily, who I barely knew. She wrote, "What you did at the wedding was brave. I've been engaged twice. I walked down the aisle both times and didn't say a word. I still think about it. I wish I'd done what you did." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just my story, it was ours. Every woman who stayed quiet, who played small, who accepted less than she deserved because someone convinced her it was polite. I wasn't broken. I wasn't dramatic. I was done shrinking. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I didn't spiral. I didn't fall apart. I started over, piece by piece. I went back to work. I repainted my apartment. I took a solo weekend trip to Maine and walked barefoot on the beach just because I could. Sierra and I got closer than ever. She showed up every weekend with wine and too much takeout. She said, "I'm not going to say I told you so, but I am going to say I got your back." And she did. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. I put down every thought, every memory, every moment from that day. It became therapy. It became clarity. It became me, in words, unfiltered. Judith tried to reach out once, through a mutual friend. "She wants to talk," they said, "clear the air." I said no. Some people don't deserve a second conversation, and closure isn't something they get to ask for when they've never once offered you dignity. As for Ethan, I never heard from him, and that silence finally made sense. It wasn't just who he was, it was who he chose to be, and I choose differently now. I choose people who speak up, who stand beside me when I'm being pushed down, who clap for me when I rise, who love me out loud, not just when it's easy. So, no, I didn't marry Ethan Sterling. I didn't walk out of that chapel with a husband, but I walked out with something so much more powerful. I walked out with myself. And that, I've learned, is the kind of love you never have to question. So, if you've ever felt pressure to stay quiet, to smile through the hurt, or to play small for the comfort of others, just know this: you're not alone. And you never have to apologize for choosing yourself. If this story moved you, helped you feel seen, or gave you something to think about, please like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and drop a comment below. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts or your own story. And if you want more real stories like this, raw, honest, unfiltered, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment. Thanks for being here. And remember, you don't have to say "I do" to prove your worth. You just have to say "I'm enough." And that's my story. I didn't leave the chapel with a husband. I left with my voice. And honestly, that was the real gift. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of your worth, or even just made you think, please take a second to like the video. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who might need a little strength today. Comment below. Tell me your thoughts or your own moment of choosing yourself. I read every single one. And if you want more true stories that are real, raw, and unapologetically honest, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Thanks for being here. You are enough, always.